The sun was just starting to peek through the tall pine trees when Lisa tied her hiking boots. She could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen where her husband David was packing their backpacks with water bottles and energy bars. It was one of those perfect autumn mornings in the mountains of Colorado, the kind that makes you want to be outside all day. "You ready for this adventure?" David called out, zipping up his green backpack. He had been talking about this hike for weeks now. There was a waterfall hidden deep in the forest that he had discovered during one of his solo trips, and he was excited to show Lisa this secret spot. Lisa wasn't as experienced with hiking as David was. While he spent most weekends exploring mountain trails, she usually preferred staying home with a good book and a cup of tea. But something about his excitement was infectious. Plus, the weather forecast promised a beautiful day with clear skies and mild temperatures. "As ready as I'll ever be," Lisa laughed, grabbing her water bottle from the counter. She had borrowed David's old hiking boots, which were a bit too big but comfortable enough for walking. They drove their pickup truck to the trailhead, listening to their favorite country music station. The parking area was almost empty, just an old Jeep with mud on its tires and a small sedan that looked like it belonged to some serious hikers. David parked near a wooden sign that showed the trail map and safety warnings. "This trail isn't too difficult," David explained as they got out of the truck. "It's about 3 miles to the waterfall, and the path is pretty clear most of the way. We'll take our time. Stop whenever you need to rest." The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine needles and fallen leaves. Lisa took a deep breath and felt her stress from the busy work week start to melt away. Living in the mountains had its perks, but she didn't take advantage of them nearly enough. They started walking on the well-marked trail, their boots crunching on the carpet of red and gold leaves. The forest was alive with small sounds: birds chirping in the trees, squirrels rustling through the undergrowth, and the distant sound of running water somewhere ahead. "Look at those colors," Lisa said, stopping to take a photo with her phone. The aspen trees were showing off their autumn gold, creating a natural cathedral of color against the deep green of the evergreens. David smiled, watching his wife discover the beauty he had been trying to share with her for years. "I told you this place was special. Just wait until you see the waterfall." They walked at a comfortable pace, stopping frequently for Lisa to catch her breath and take pictures. David pointed out different plants and birds along the way, sharing little bits of knowledge he had picked up during his many hikes in these mountains. "See that bird with the blue wings?" he said, pointing to a jay perched on a low branch. "They're really smart. Some people say they can remember human faces and warn other birds about people who might be dangerous." Lisa found herself relaxing more with each step. The constant noise of traffic and email notifications that filled her daily life seemed a million miles away. Here, the only things that mattered were putting one foot in front of the other and enjoying the incredible scenery. After about an hour of steady walking, they reached a small clearing where the trail split in 2 directions. David checked his phone's GPS app even though he was pretty sure he remembered the way. "We go left here," he said confidently. "The right trail leads to the old mining ruins, but our waterfall is up this way." The left trail was narrower and less traveled than the main path they had been following. The trees grew closer together, creating a tunnel of branches overhead that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns on the ground. Lisa noticed that this part of the hike required more careful stepping. Tree roots crossed the path in several places, and there were some loose rocks that shifted under their feet. David stayed close behind her, ready to offer a helping hand when needed. "You doing okay?" he asked, as they navigated around a fallen log that blocked part of the trail. "Yeah, this is actually really nice," Lisa replied, surprised by how much she was enjoying herself. "I can see why you love doing this so much." They came to a small stream that crossed the trail. David hopped across easily on the scattered stones, then turned to help Lisa make the crossing. The water was crystal clear and so cold that they could see their breath when they knelt down to splash some on their faces. "We're about halfway there," David said, checking his watch. They had been hiking for about 90 minutes, and he wanted to make sure they had plenty of time to enjoy the waterfall before heading back. The trail began to climb more steeply as they got closer to their destination. Lisa could hear the sound of rushing water getting louder, which gave her extra motivation to keep going. Her legs were starting to feel tired, but the excitement of seeing this hidden waterfall kept her moving forward. "I can hear it," she said, pausing to listen to the increasing roar of falling water. "That's it," David grinned. "Just around the next bend, we'll start to see it through the trees." They continued up the winding trail, both of them eager to reach the waterfall that had brought them out on this beautiful autumn morning. The forest seemed to be getting wilder and more remote with every step, and Lisa felt like they were explorers discovering a secret part of the world that few people ever got to see. Neither of them had any idea that their peaceful morning hike was about to take a turn that would change everything. The trail ahead looked just like all the trail behind them, safe, well-worn, and inviting. But sometimes the mountains have their own plans, and even the most experienced hikers can find themselves facing unexpected challenges. As they rounded the next bend, getting closer to the sound of the waterfall, David was already planning where they would stop for lunch and how long they would stay before heading back home. It was going to be a perfect day in the mountains, or so they thought. The sound of rushing water grew louder as Lisa and David made their way around a sharp curve in the trail. The path here was different from what they had been walking on, rockier and more challenging, with loose stones scattered along the edges. "Be careful here," David called back to Lisa. "This section can be a bit tricky." The trail ran along the edge of a steep drop-off that fell away into a rocky canyon below. David had walked this same path several times before without any problems. But today something felt different. Maybe it was because he was excited to show Lisa the waterfall, or maybe he was just being less careful than usual. Lisa stayed back a few steps, watching where David placed his feet so she could follow the same path. She could see patches of the waterfall through the trees now, and the sight took her breath away. The water cascaded down smooth granite rocks in several tiers, creating pools that sparkled in the filtered sunlight. "David, this is incredible," she called out. "I can't believe you found this place." David turned back to smile at her, proud that she was finally seeing what he had been trying to share. "Just wait until we get to the bottom. There's a perfect spot where we can sit and have lunch right next to the water." He took another step forward, focusing more on Lisa's reaction than on where he was putting his foot. The rock he stepped on looked solid, the same gray granite that made up most of the trail. But this particular stone had been loosened by recent rain and freeze-thaw cycles. The moment David put his full weight on it, the rock shifted and crumbled away. "David!" Lisa screamed as she watched her husband suddenly disappear from the trail. Time seemed to slow down as David fell. He reached out desperately, trying to grab onto something, anything that might stop his fall. His fingers scraped against loose dirt and small rocks as he tumbled down the steep embankment, his body bouncing off trees and boulders on the way down. Lisa ran to the edge of the trail, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "David, David, can you hear me?" For what felt like forever, there was only silence except for the sound of the waterfall. Then from somewhere far below, she heard a weak voice. "Lisa, I'm here, but I can't." She could barely make out his words over the noise of the rushing water. Lying on her stomach, Lisa carefully crawled to the very edge of the drop-off and looked down. The slope was steep and covered with loose rocks, fallen logs, and thick brush. About 15 feet below, she could see David lying against a large boulder, one leg bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch. "Are you okay?" she called down, knowing it was a stupid question but not knowing what else to say. "My leg," David's voice came back, strained with pain. "I think it's broken. I can't stand up." Lisa felt panic rising in her chest. They were miles from the nearest road, with no cell phone signal this deep in the mountains. She had never been on this trail before, and David was the one who knew the way back. Even if she could somehow get down to where he was, she had no idea how to help someone with a broken leg. "I'm going to come down to you," she called out, trying to sound braver than she felt. "No!" David's voice was urgent despite his pain. "It's too steep. You'll fall too. The rocks are all loose." Lisa looked around desperately for something, anything that might help. There were plenty of fallen branches, but none of them were long enough or strong enough to reach David. She tried her phone again, holding it up high and moving around, but there was still no signal. "I have to go get help," she yelled down to David. "Don't leave me," he called back, and she could hear the fear in his voice now. "I won't be long. I'll run back to the parking area and call for help." But even as she said it, Lisa knew it would take her at least 2 hours to get back to where they had left the truck, assuming she could even find her way without David to guide her. And then how long would it take for a rescue team to get here? The sun was already getting higher in the sky, and mountain weather could change quickly. She started to turn away from the edge, planning to run as fast as she could back down the trail, when she heard David call out again. "Lisa, wait. Try to find a long branch or something. Maybe if you can reach me, I can grab on and you can help pull me up." Lisa searched frantically among the trees near the trail. She found several branches that had fallen during recent storms, but when she dragged them to the edge and lowered them down, they were all too short or too weak to be useful. "It's not working," she called down, feeling tears of frustration starting to form in her eyes. She could hear David moving around down there, probably trying to find a way to climb up on his own despite his injured leg. But every few seconds there would be the sound of loose rock sliding down the slope, followed by a grunt of pain from David. Lisa had never felt so helpless in her entire life. Her husband was hurt and trapped, and she had no idea how to save him. She wasn't strong enough to pull him up even if she had a rope. She wasn't experienced enough to climb down safely to where he was. And she was terrified of leaving him alone to go find help, especially since she wasn't even sure she could find her way back to the parking area without getting lost herself. The morning that had started so perfectly was turning into a nightmare. Lisa sat at the edge of the trail, looking down at David and trying to think of what to do next. The sound of the waterfall that had seemed so beautiful just minutes before now seemed to mock them, drowning out their voices and making it even harder to communicate. "David, I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely carrying over the noise of the falling water. "I know," he called back. "Me too. But we're going to figure this out. Someone will come along the trail eventually." But Lisa wasn't so sure about that. They hadn't seen any other hikers all morning, and this was a pretty remote trail. It could be hours or even days before someone else came this way. And what if David's injuries were worse than they thought? What if he was bleeding internally, or had hit his head? As she sat there trying to decide what to do, Lisa suddenly realized she could hear something new. A sound that didn't belong to the forest or the waterfall. It was rhythmic and steady, getting closer by the moment. Hoofbeats. Lisa lifted her head, listening carefully to make sure she wasn't imagining the sound. But there it was again, the steady clip-clop of horse hooves on the rocky trail, getting closer with each passing second. "Someone's coming," she called down to David, feeling the first spark of hope since this whole nightmare had started. Around the bend in the trail came a man on horseback, moving at a steady pace through the trees. He was tall and lean, wearing a well-worn cowboy hat, denim jacket, and leather chaps that showed he spent a lot of time in the saddle. His horse was a sturdy-looking chestnut with white markings on its face and legs. The rider spotted Lisa immediately and urged his horse forward. As he got closer, Lisa could see that he had kind eyes and a weathered face that suggested he had spent most of his life outdoors. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" he asked, pulling his horse to a stop and tipping his hat politely. "My husband fell down there," Lisa said, pointing toward the edge of the trail. "He's hurt bad and I can't get him out." The cowboy dismounted quickly and walked over to where Lisa was sitting. He moved with the confident, unhurried manner of someone who had dealt with emergencies before. "Name's Jake," he said simply. "Let me take a look at what we're dealing with here." Jake lay down on his stomach and peered over the edge, immediately assessing the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years working in rough country. "Hey down there," he called to David. "Can you hear me okay?" "Yeah, I can. Hear you?" David's voice came back, sounding stronger now that help had arrived. "What hurts?" Jake asked. "My left leg mostly. I think it's broken. And my ribs are pretty sore." Jake studied the steep slope, noting the loose rocks and the angle of the drop. He had rescued cattle from similar situations before, and while this was certainly more complicated, the basic principles were the same. "I've got rope in my saddlebags," Jake told Lisa, "and I know how to get down there safely. But first, I need to make sure my horse is secure. Jake walked back to his horse and spoke to it quietly while he loosened the saddle cinch and pulled out a coiled rope. The horse, which he called Thunder, stood perfectly still, ground-tied by nothing more than the dropped reins. Thunder here is trained for ranch work, Jake explained to Lisa. He'll stay right where I tell him to, no matter what. Jake tied one end of his rope securely to a large pine tree near the trail, then tested the knot with his full weight. Satisfied that it would hold, he began putting on a pair of leather gloves that he pulled from his jacket pocket. I'm coming down, he called to David. Try to stay as still as you can until I get there. Lisa watched in amazement as Jake rappelled down the steep slope with the ease of someone who had done this countless times. He moved carefully but confidently, using his boots to find secure footing on the unstable surface. When he reached David, Jake immediately began checking for injuries with gentle but thorough hands. David winced as Jake examined his leg, but he stayed still and answered Jake's questions about what hurt and how much. Good news is, you don't seem to have any head injuries or problems with your spine, Jake called up to Lisa. Bad news is, that leg is definitely broken and we need to get you to a doctor pretty soon. From his saddlebags, Jake produced a small first aid kit and began fashioning a makeshift splint from some straight branches and medical tape. He worked quickly but carefully, explaining what he was doing to keep David calm. I've got to stabilize this leg before we try to move you, Jake said. It's going to hurt some, but it'll be worse if we don't do it right. David gritted his teeth as Jake positioned the splint and wrapped it securely. The pain was intense, but he could tell that Jake knew what he was doing. Now comes the tricky part, Jake called up to Lisa. I'm going to need your help to get your husband back up to the trail. Jake had already figured out a plan. Using his rope and some branches as levers, he could create a simple pulley system that would allow Lisa to help pull David up the slope, while Jake guided him from below and made sure the injured leg didn't get caught on anything. Have you ever used a rope before? Jake asked Lisa. Not really, she admitted. That's okay. I'll teach you what you need to know. The main thing is to pull steady and stop when I tell you to stop. Jake positioned David carefully in a harness, made from the rope, making sure the injured leg was supported and protected. Then he climbed back up the slope, leaving the rope in place. All right, Jake said to Lisa. When I count to 3, you start pulling. Not fast, just steady. I'll be going back down to guide him up and make sure he doesn't hit any rocks. Lisa took hold of the rope, her hands shaking slightly from nervousness and adrenaline. 1, 2, 3. Lisa began to pull, feeling the weight of her husband on the other end of the rope. Jake had climbed back down and was carefully guiding David up the slope, using his own strength to support most of the weight, while Lisa's pulling provided the upward momentum. Doing great, Jake called out. Keep that steady pull going. It took nearly 20 minutes of careful work, but finally David was back on level ground, lying on the trail with his splinted leg stretched out in front of him. How are you feeling? Lisa asked, kneeling beside her husband. A lot better now that I'm not stuck down there. David managed to smile despite the pain. Jake was already thinking about the next challenge. They were still 3 miles from the nearest road, and David certainly couldn't walk that far with a broken leg. Here's what we're going to do, Jake said, looking at both of them. My horse can carry 2 people if we're careful about it. I'll walk alongside and lead him. It'll take us about an hour to get to where an ambulance can meet us. Are you sure your horse can handle that? Lisa asked. Jake patted Thunder's neck affectionately. This old boy has carried heavier loads than you two. Haven't you, Thunder? As if he understood, Thunder snorted softly and nuzzled Jake's shoulder. Getting David onto the horse was the next challenge, but Jake had figured that out too. Using the rope system again, they were able to lift David up and get him positioned securely on Thunder's back, with his injured leg supported by an improvised stirrup. You ride behind him, Jake told Lisa. Keep him steady and make sure he doesn't slide off if he gets dizzy. Lisa had never ridden a horse before, but with Jake's help she managed to get on behind David and wrap her arms around his waist. Ready? Jake asked, taking Thunder's reins. As ready as we'll ever be, David said. And with that, Their slow journey back to civilization began, with Jake walking beside them every step of the way, making sure they stayed safe on the long trip home. The journey back down the mountain was unlike anything Lisa had ever experienced. Thunder moved with careful, measured steps, as if he understood exactly how precious his cargo was. Jake walked alongside, one hand on the horse's bridle, talking quietly to keep the animal calm and focused. "How are you holding up back there?" Jake asked Lisa after they had been traveling for about 15 minutes. "I'm okay," Lisa replied, though her arms were already getting tired from holding David steady. "David, how's the pain?" "Not too bad as long as we don't hit any big bumps," David said, though Lisa could tell he was trying to sound braver than he felt. The trail down the mountain was different from their hike up that morning. What had seemed like gentle slopes on the way up now felt steep and treacherous, especially when you were trying to keep an injured person stable on horseback. Every loose rock or fallen branch became a potential disaster. Jake seemed to sense every obstacle before they reached it. When they came to a particularly rocky section, he would stop Thunder and carefully guide the horse around the worst spots. When they had to cross the small stream they had splashed in earlier, Jake led Thunder to the most stable crossing point and stayed close to make sure nobody fell. "You really know what you're doing," Lisa said, grateful for Jake's calm confidence. "Been doing this kind of thing most of my life," Jake replied modestly. "My family's ranch is just a few miles from here. We're always pulling cattle out of trouble spots or helping neighbors who get stuck in bad weather." As they made their way slowly down the trail, Lisa found herself studying this stranger who had appeared just when they needed him most. Jake looked to be in his 30s, with the kind of weathered hands and sun-lined face that came from years of outdoor work. There was something reassuring about the way he moved and spoke, like someone who had dealt with plenty of emergencies and knew how to stay calm under pressure. "What were you doing up on that trail anyway?" David asked, trying to keep his mind off the pain. "Checking on some cattle that wandered off from our pasture," Jake explained. "We've got grazing rights on some of the public land up there, and sometimes the cows decide to go exploring. I was heading up to round up a few strays when I heard your wife calling for help. Lucky for us," David said. "I don't think it was luck," Jake replied quietly. "Sometimes things just work out the way they're supposed to." They had to stop several times to rest Thunder and give David a chance to adjust his position. During one of these breaks, Jake pulled out his cell phone and managed to get a weak signal. "I'm going to call ahead and have an ambulance meet us at the trailhead," he said. "That way we won't waste any time once we get there." Lisa listened as Jake gave clear, precise directions to the emergency dispatcher. He knew exactly where they were and how long it would take to reach the parking area. It was obvious that he had done this before. "They'll be waiting for us," Jake told them after hanging up. "About another hour and we'll have you in good hands." The sun was getting higher in the sky, and what had started as a cool mountain morning was turning into a warm day. Jake noticed that David was starting to look pale and sweaty. "Let's stop in that shade for a few minutes," Jake said, leading Thunder under a grove of aspen trees. Jake helped Lisa down from the horse, then carefully supported David while he repositioned himself to ease the pressure on his injured leg. From his saddlebags, Jake pulled out a water bottle and offered it to David. "Small sips," Jake advised. "You don't want to get sick on top of everything else." While David rested, Jake checked Thunder's feet and adjusted the saddle to make sure everything was still secure for the rest of the journey. "Is this what you do for a living?" Lisa asked Jake. "Ranching, I mean?" "Mostly," Jake nodded. "My family's had the ranch for 3 generations. It's not easy work and it doesn't pay great, but I can't imagine doing anything else." "Do you live alone out there?" Jake was quiet for a moment, looking off toward the mountains. "Yeah, just me and the animals, these days. My dad passed a few years ago and my brother moved to Denver for work. I keep thinking I should probably sell the place and do something else, but..." He shrugged. "I guess I'm not ready to give up on it yet." Lisa heard something in his voice, a loneliness that he was trying to hide behind practical words. She realized that this strong, capable man who had saved them might be dealing with his own struggles. "Your parents must have been proud of how you turned out," she said gently. Jake smiled, the first real smile Lisa had seen from him all day. My mom always said I was too stubborn for my own good. But she also said that sometimes being stubborn is what keeps you going when things get tough. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, Jake said simply. After about 10 minutes, they got back on the trail. David seemed to be feeling a little better after the rest, and Thunder was as steady as ever. Jake walked beside them, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife to help pass the time. "See that hawk up there?" he said, gesturing toward a large bird circling overhead. "That's a red-tailed hawk. They mate for life, you know. Once they find their partner, they stick together through everything." Lisa found herself thinking about that as they continued down the mountain. She and David had been married for 8 years, and while they had certainly faced challenges before, nothing like this. But seeing how they had worked together during this crisis, how David had stayed calm despite his pain, how she had found strength she didn't know she had, made her feel like their relationship was stronger than she had realized. "Almost there," Jake announced as they rounded a familiar bend in the trail. Up ahead, Lisa could see the wooden trail sign that marked the beginning of their hike. It felt like that had happened days ago instead of just a few hours. In the parking area, she could see their pickup truck right where they had left it, along with an ambulance and a sheriff's patrol car. Paramedics came running up the trail to meet them carrying a stretcher and medical equipment. Jake helped them transfer David from Thunder's back to the stretcher, giving them a quick rundown of the injuries and what he had done to stabilize the broken leg. "You did good work," one of the paramedics told Jake. "That splint probably prevented a lot of additional damage." As they loaded David into the ambulance, he grabbed Lisa's hand. "Go thank Jake properly," he said. "I don't think we can ever repay him for what he did today." Lisa looked around for Jake, but he was already walking away, leading Thunder toward a horse trailer that was parked at the far end of the lot. "Jake, wait!" she called out, running after him. He turned around, his hat in his hands. "How's your husband doing?" "The paramedics say he's going to be fine, thanks to you." Lisa felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did today. You saved his life." Jake looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Lisa said firmly. "Not everyone would have known how to do what you did. And not everyone would have cared enough to spend their whole day helping complete strangers." Jake was loading Thunder into the trailer, but he stopped to look at Lisa. "Your husband's a lucky man to have someone who loves him as much as you do." "We're both lucky," Lisa said. "Lucky that you came along when you did." As the ambulance pulled away with its lights flashing, Lisa waved goodbye to the cowboy who had given them both a second chance at life together. 3 weeks later, David was sitting in their living room with his leg propped up in a cast, flipping through a magazine while Lisa made lunch in the kitchen. The doctors at the hospital had been impressed with how well his leg had been stabilized during the rescue. The break was clean, and with proper rest he would make a full recovery. "I've been thinking," Lisa said, bringing David a sandwich and sitting down beside him on the couch. "About what?" David asked, though he had a feeling he knew where this conversation was going. "About Jake. We never really got a chance to thank him properly. Everything happened so fast at the hospital, and then we were so focused on getting you better." David nodded. "I've been thinking about that too. The man probably saved my life, and we don't even know his last name." Lisa had been carrying Jake's business card in her wallet for 3 weeks. Well, it wasn't really a business card, just a piece of paper torn from a small notebook with Jake Morrison, Morrison Ranch, and a phone number written in pencil. One of the paramedics had gotten it from him before he left the trailhead that day, thinking Lisa might want to follow up. "I looked up his ranch online," Lisa said. "It's about 20 miles from here, up in Pine Valley. It looks like it's been in his family for a long time." "What are you thinking?" David asked, though he could see from his wife's expression that she had already made up her mind about something. "I want to visit him. Bring him a proper thank you gift, maybe some of that apple pie you're always bragging about me making." David smiled. "That sounds like a great idea. But shouldn't we wait until I can walk better?" "Actually," Lisa said, looking a little embarrassed, "I was thinking I might go by myself first, just to thank him and see how he's doing. Then maybe we could both go back together once you're feeling stronger." The truth was, Lisa hadn't been able to stop thinking about Jake. Not in a romantic way. She was completely devoted to David. But she kept remembering the loneliness she had heard in his voice when he talked about living alone on the ranch. Something about that had touched her heart. 2 days later, Lisa drove up the winding dirt road that led to Morrison Ranch. The property was beautiful, with rolling pastures surrounded by mountains, and a classic red barn that looked like something from a postcard. She could see cattle grazing in the distance and a few horses in a corral near the barn. The house was a modest log cabin with a covered porch and flower boxes under the windows. As Lisa parked her car and got out, she could hear the sound of hammering coming from behind the barn. She followed the sound and found Jake working on a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent storm. He was so focused on his work that he didn't notice her approaching until she was just a few feet away. "Jake?" she called out. He looked up, surprised, and immediately set down his hammer. "Lisa, how's David doing?" "He's doing great, thanks to you." Lisa held up the pie container she had brought. "I made you something as a small thank you gift." Jake wiped his hands on his jeans and accepted the pie with a genuine smile. "You didn't need to do that, but I appreciate it." "Apple? David said it was your favorite, though I'm not sure how he would know that." Jake laughed. "Lucky guess, I suppose. Would you like to come up to the house? I can make some coffee to go with this." As they walked toward the cabin, Lisa looked around at the ranch with interest. Everything was well maintained but clearly showed the wear of hard use. This was a working ranch, not a hobby farm for city folks who wanted to play cowboy. "How long have you lived here?" Lisa asked. "My whole life, except for a few years in college," Jake replied. "My great-grandfather bought this land in 1952, and we've been here ever since." The inside of the cabin was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and family photos covering one wall. Lisa could see pictures of Jake as a child, along with what must have been his parents and brother at various family gatherings over the years. "You have a beautiful place," Lisa said, accepting a cup of coffee and sitting down at the kitchen table. "Thanks. It's a lot of work for one person, but I love it." Jake cut 2 pieces of pie and sat down across from her. "How are you doing after everything that happened? That must have been pretty scary." "It was terrifying," Lisa admitted. "I had no idea what to do. If you hadn't come along when you did..." She shook her head, not wanting to think about what might have happened. "But I did come along," Jake said gently, "and everything worked out fine." They talked for over an hour, covering everything from ranch life to Lisa's work as a teacher at the local elementary school. Jake was easy to talk to, with a quiet sense of humor and genuine interest in what other people had to say. "I should probably get going," Lisa said eventually, noticing that the sun was starting to get low in the sky. "David will wonder where I am." "Tell him I said hello," Jake said, walking her out to her car. "And tell him I'm glad he's doing better." "Jake," Lisa said, hesitating slightly, "would you like to come to dinner sometime? David would love to thank you in person, and I know he'd enjoy hearing more about your ranch." Jake looked surprised by the invitation. "That's very kind of you, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It wouldn't be imposing. We'd love to have you." Jake was quiet for a moment, and Lisa could see him considering the offer. She had a feeling that he didn't get many dinner invitations. "All right," he said finally. "I'd like that." The following weekend, Jake came to dinner at Lisa and David's house. He brought fresh vegetables from his garden and spent the evening sharing stories about ranch life and mountain adventures. David was fascinated by Jake's knowledge of the outdoors, and Lisa enjoyed watching the 2 men become friends. That dinner was the beginning of something special. Jake became a regular visitor to their home, and Lisa and David often drove out to the ranch to help with various projects. Lisa discovered that she enjoyed the physical work of ranch life, feeding animals, mending fences, and helping with the vegetable garden that Jake's mother had started years earlier. More importantly, Lisa found herself getting involved with the local search and rescue team. Inspired by Jake's example of helping people in crisis, she took training courses and learned wilderness first aid. Within a year, she was one of the team's most dedicated volunteers. "I never thought I'd be the type of person who goes out in The mountains to help rescue people, Lisa told Jake one day as they worked together in his garden. You always had it in you, Jake replied. You just needed the right situation to bring it out. Jake, meanwhile, found that having friends to share his ranch with made the work feel less lonely. David, despite his earlier accident, became an enthusiastic helper during weekend visits. The ranch that had felt like a burden when Jake was managing, it alone became a source of joy when shared with people who appreciated it. 6 months after the accident, Lisa organized a barbecue at the ranch for all the members of the search and rescue team. Jake's property was perfect for the event, with plenty of space for people to gather and beautiful mountain views in every direction. Look at this, David said to Lisa as they watched Jake showing some of the younger team members how to rope a fence post. 6 months ago, he was just a guy living alone on a ranch. Now he's got more friends than he knows what to do with. He was always that same good person, Lisa replied. He just needed people to see it. As the sun set behind the mountains that evening, Lisa looked around at all the people laughing and talking together in Jake's pasture. The search and rescue team members were sharing stories with Jake's ranch neighbors. Kids were petting the horses while their parents planned future visits to help with harvest time. What had started as a terrifying accident on a mountain trail had somehow grown into something beautiful, a community of people who cared about each other and were ready to help when help was needed. Jake walked over to where Lisa and David were sitting, holding a cup of coffee and looking more relaxed and happy than Lisa had ever seen him. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Lisa asked. "For giving me my life back," Jake said. "I thought I was happy living alone out here, but I didn't realize how much I was missing until you two showed up." Lisa smiled, thinking about how much her own life had changed since that morning on the trail. She had discovered strength she didn't know she had, found a way to help others in her community, and gained a friendship that would last the rest of her life. "I think we all saved each other," she said. And as the stars began to appear in the clear mountain sky surrounded by friends old and new, Lisa knew that was exactly right.